What's going on, 12-2 Nation? We are back with another group call Q&A. And last month we hit a Q&A on servant leadership, and you guys brought a ton of good questions to the table through social media, through different meetings with our coaches, all the above. They were great. And so this month we're on the topic of integrity. And 2 weeks ago we heard kind of a debrief on what integrity was, how can we live it out, what we can really do to tangibly set the standard of integrity. And then we got the opportunity to hear from UNO hockey player Chase LaPinta on what integrity means to him and how he's been able to live out integrity in a hockey space playing for UNO. And then tonight we are going to tackle some questions that you guys have really brought to the table about integrity. And Coach Nolan and I are just kind of going to bounce back and forth um, on different ideas and things that come up on this topic and on the question. So we're going to start with the question of what does it really mean to have integrity as an athlete?
Yeah, I think that's solid. I think it might look a little bit different for everyone, but I think at the end of the day, it's doing the right things for the right reasons. And I think on the last call, Chase alluded to kind of when no one's looking. But what I was thinking more after last call was like, okay, not only when other people aren't looking, but when people are looking, is it for the right heart posture, or is it to be seen? Is it to be noticed by your coach? Is it to be, to look good for a certain group of people? So when I think integrity, I not only think of the hey, when no one's looking, but also when people are around, do you still do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, or do you do it because you're looking for the approval or not intention, of tension of other people as well?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And honestly, too, I think going off of yes, what you just said and what Chase kind of alluded to last week, I think recognizing that people are watching. People are seeing how you interact, the way you talk, the way you move, the way you do certain things, or you're taking shortcuts. And I think really when it comes to what it means to have integrity as an athlete, it's everything that you just said, but it's also not cutting corners and also staying true to your values. And when I say staying true to your values, it's really you have to define those values. Why do you do what you do? Why are you standing the way you stand? Why do you interact with people the way you interact with them? Why do you work hard, right? And it's because of things that you believe in, the foundation that you've set. And so not cutting corners and realizing that people are watching, right? And so we are held to a higher standard as leaders. And so that's why we need to do things with integrity and with the right intention. Love the heart posture point that you made there. This was one that I think a lot of athletes and a lot of people just really struggle with in general. And it's a question that kept coming up and up time and time again. And it's how do I stay true to my values when others around me aren't? And this really can go towards yes in the athletic world, because I think that's a huge one. Especially when it comes to cutting corners and kind of dogging it in practice and maybe showing up a little bit late. But I also think it can relate to off the field too, right? And so the question again is how can I stay true to my values when others around me aren't?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for athletes to bring up. Uh, One, I would say you have to know what your core values are first, and you got to know like what you value at a heart level and be very clear on that. Because I think when that's unclear or there's some question in that, it's way easier to tiptoe that line and usually fall to the wrong side of it. So I would say first off, as athletes, we need to make that intention clear of what that looks like for ourselves and hopefully our teammates and our coaches and all that good stuff, that everyone's in unison. But even if it's just you at a core level, like who are you? And what standard do you uphold? And then from there, too, I think I would challenge the point that I think it's easy to get into that victim mindset of, hey, well, everybody else around me is doing something different, and everybody else around me is maybe pulling in the opposite direction. And that may feel true, that may even look true in some cases. But I would guess even majority of the time when the bulk of the group is going the wrong direction, there's going to be guys in that group that really want to get on board and that do have those same feelings as you and want to be held to a higher standard. And so I think really searching for those guys that want to pull the boat in the right direction. There's an interesting rule of thumb in leadership, the 25-50-25, and a lot of leaders think, hey, the upper 25% of the team, like that leader's job is to pull the bottom 25 up to the 50% group and just get them kind of in the middle of the pack. But in reality, they encourage you that for leaders, it's smartest to actually pull guys from that 50% group that's kind of walking the fence, not knowing what they really believe, up into that high capacity group. Because the more guys you have working at that high level and really holding each other accountable, the more the group's going to follow. So I think that's a pretty interesting and good rule of thumb to think about in regard to some of our teammates and the people who are around.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a good tool and a good mindset thinking about that, of just the reality is there is so many people kind of walking the line. Like they don't really know what they believe. They're kind of they're doing things because everybody else is doing it. They're kind of following the crowd, following the current. And us as leaders, right, we're called to kind of swim the opposite direction, to kind of do things a different way than society or culture tells us to. It's the 12-2, right? In 12-2 training, it's to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, right? And it starts up there, and in our minds, we have to define, like Coach Nolan said, what our values are so that we can live them out and go in the direction of those values instead of swimming the path that everybody else is going or walking the path that everybody else is going. And so I think finding those like-minded individuals. I think of just teammates on your team or friends in your classroom that embody and encompass the same values that you have. It's that really that value of iron sharpening iron. It's one person sharpening another. It's you two really just pushing each other in the right direction. And two is stronger than one. And three, four, five, right? More people will just follow once they see what you guys are kind of walking towards and believing in. And so I think it's a huge point there by Coach Nolan. Um, Another really good question um, is, so to kind of set this one up, we really know and truly believe that nobody's perfect, right? Like we all make mistakes, we all slip, we all fumble. There may be a day where you're maybe feeling a little bit tired and you do cut the corner and you maybe don't bring your best effort to practice, or you show up late, or you do one less rep than coach says, and people see that and they call you out on it. And so the question that we've got from a lot of you guys is, how do I recover my reputation if I've made a mistake? If I lose my integrity, how do I recover that?
Yeah, man, once again, I think that's a layered question, and I think each situation is going to look very different, and it really depends on maybe the severity of the act that took place. And so there is the reality that trust is lost in that sometimes when we choose to make a selfish move, when we choose to do something for ourselves, it can really have some bad backlash on it. So that's not to sound discouraging. I think it should encourage you the opposite side to like, hey, like what protections, what boundaries, what people do I have, what voices do I let into my life to prevent me from ever, getting to a spot where my integrity's put on the line and questions. A few other thoughts to add on to that. One, I think what you do consistently, people realize. And so I think the more consistent you are, it's like, hey, even if Coach Nolan screws up, like they know at my core what I believe and what I stand in. In the same breath, a lot of those people that see the way I act are looking for me to fall and are looking for you to slip up, because you do hopefully set such a good standard, such a high standard, that it's like, man, people, unfortunately, and once again, I would say this is probably more the bottom 25, but maybe even some of the people in the 50% range that are like, hey, like maybe we can just get him to slip. Maybe we can bring him down to our level and just get him and just kind of prove he's human. And so I think as a leader, it's actually best to lead in humility and lead in some vulnerability as well. Because I think when you try to project the, hey, I've got it all together, I've got it all figured out, man, that's when people are looking to take you down. But if actually as a leader, you can kind of admit and step in, and maybe it's something in your personal life where like people would never know unless you addressed it. I think there's ways to actually approach it and be like, kind of to Coach Joe's point, like, hey, I'm human, like I'm not perfect, but I do follow, a perfect savior that did set the example. And so I'm trying to follow that the best I can. But with that comes a lot of error and a lot of need for grace. So I think the more we can actually invite people into that. I know I struggled with that, to be honest, in high school and in junior and college, really thinking I had to have it all together constantly, and felt like there was no place for Nolan to just be Nolan. And just by working with a sports psych and just having some other trustworthy people in my life, they're like, hey, like nobody follows a leader with no scars. And I think like the more we can just put ourselves out there and trust that like, hey, like being vulnerable could actually connect with people. Like people admire your strengths, but they're going to relate to your weakness that much more. So without going into too much of a rant, I think that's a really good question. And like I said, what are those boundaries that you can set and those people that can be very present in your life? And it doesn't have to be many people, but a couple of people that know you the best. And then two, how do you really lead in vulnerability as well and not put on this fake face of like, hey, I do have it all together. Because the reality is like we all don't. So
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think I could second everything that Nolan said. And I want to pick out that one part that you said is, hey, people will admire your strengths, but they will relate to your weaknesses, right? Because the reality is, again, that nobody's perfect. Nobody has the answer key. Nobody has it all together. People will praise you, right, for your strengths and what you do well, but they will relate to your weaknesses, right? It's why people love the underdog, right? People, Tom Brady, nobody can really relate to winning 7, 8 Super Bowls, but people can relate to the underdog, the 16 seed beating the 1 seed, because more times than not, we feel like we're the underdog. And I think I want to go back to that first point too of what Nolan said is it is a layered question, but I think it's people notice what you do consistently. And a couple weeks ago on the group call, we talked about how it's not what you do one time, two times that matters, but it's what you do consistently, because we know that what you do today, what you do consistently will build lasting change over time. And so it's just really building a habit. You start something today, tomorrow, the next day, it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but lasting change comes with little steps today. And so you got to get outside of your comfort zone, get outside of the boat, and really just decide, hey, I'm gonna get uncomfortable and do something new, and be consistent. Be consistent. I think the word that we need to really set in on and hone in on is consistent. And people will notice what you do consistently. And so thought that was great insight there from Coach Nolan. And I think there's so much more there. You're right, just on that question. There's so many different routes and layers to it. Another good question that kind of falls into some of these categories is that we got is, how do I handle pressure to get ahead in a society of just do this, take a shortcut, do this, it'll save you this much amount of time to get to the spotlight, rather than doing it the right way, having integrity and trusting that you're going to get there in due time. How do you handle the pressure of that and stay true and have integrity?
yeah, I think you really have to define it. Like, is it a pressure or is it more of a privilege and an opportunity to grow? And I think a story that came to mind was at the start of playoffs last year in Kansas City. I just signed on with this team for my first professional contract. We're the best team in the league, and we're starting our playoff journey, knowing like, hey, we're a team that's probably going to make a good run at winning it all. And our coach kind of told us a story or put it in a little metaphor, and he's like, guys, if I could like sprinkle pixie dust over this room right now and snap my fingers, and we would be, Kelly Cup champions right now, would you guys say yes and take it? And everybody in the room said no. Well, it's like, well, why? It's because it has nothing to do with winning. Like, that's great saying you're a Kelly Cup champion and all that, but what people love is the journey and the process that gets there. And so I think the more we can embrace that, the better off you're going to be. I think another video that comes to mind is Cooper Kupp, when he talks about, he just loved the process. He loved the day to day so much. And yes, it worked out and he got his opportunities and the right doors unlocked and all that good stuff where he's earned everything he's gotten through the hard work. But that really came from just loving the process. And so I would just say the more we can learn to love the process, the better off we're going to be in the long haul, because those guys get caught. It's like you can maybe get up level as you might see guys, and it seems like, hey, it's unfair. Like that guy's cutting corners and he's making it. Well, like I tell you firsthand, you hit a point where your luck runs out, and there's maybe a slim 0.01% that sneaks their way all the way to the top of the top because they're just that skilled. They're just that good. For 99.9% of the other athletes, it's like, okay, at some point it's going to catch up to you. So really establishing that. And that's part of our passion behind what we do here at 12-2 training. And our heart for starting this company was like, how do we equip our athletes at an earlier age, being middle school and high school and even like getting into college, so that they're ready when that moment comes and that we're not cutting those corners, knowing how impactful that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. All incredibly wise and true. And the stories about you guys, about your hockey team, right? It's about the process. It's about the journey and Cooper Cup and ultimately getting there, but having to go through multiple ACL tears and injuries and battles to just get to that point. And I think it's a true testament to being process driven versus results driven. And I think you really touched on it too of, hey, if you're results driven, you're gonna get to your result that you wanted to get to if you're blessed enough to do that, and then you're gonna what's more, what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next. Where if you're in love with the process, you'll see the continued growth from the day to day, right? You're just getting better day after day after day after day. But if you're always focused on the result, you're not going to be focused on yourself getting better. You're not going to see those little wins in the day to day and the month to month and the goals, the short term and the intermediate goals. You're always going to be chasing more. And I really think that's when we start to just fall backwards, fall forwards, really question what it is that we're going after. Is it worth it? And so I think you really hit the nail on the head there with being process driven. And I think an example and really tangible one in my life would just be the I run. I picked up running. I've been running half marathons, and next year I'm going to try and run a full marathon. And people ask me all the time, do I love running? The reality is I hate running. I get up 4 or 5 days a week and I run and I don't really I like it some days, but do I want to get up and run 8, 9, 10 miles some days? No, I don't. But I love the process because if you do it consistently, if you just do it, if you stay true to the plan, if you stay true to the goal, stay true to the journey, at the end when you get to the race, the work's been done. Everything has been done. You've already gotten better. And so you just need to go out and do it. And it's all about the process. It's being process driven. And so I think no, Coach Nolan hit the head there. And I think just to reiterate, it's about the process. And so we have one more question, kind of a tangible question slash challenge that you guys brought to the table. And it's what are some things that I can do today to really like grow my integrity. And I know we kind of touched on some things, but or if I wake up tomorrow and I want to get better in this area of my life, what can I do?
Yeah, I would say focus on something really practical. If there's something that comes to mind right away, I think it can be almost overwhelming in a sense to say like, "Hey, I want to grow in integrity." But like once again, what does that look like? I think a lot of what we do here is help give practical steps of like, okay, how do we get that 1% better? How do we get just a little bit each and every day? And so maybe lock in on one thing. I know for me, sometimes I struggle with just like talking poorly about teammates and just having situations that are maybe frustrating. And so instead of like addressing them or finding like healthy ways out, I kind of come off as maybe judgmental and, maybe share things that shouldn't be shared. And so I think focusing in on one specific area where you feel like your integrity is not where it needs to be is one of the best ways forward. And then really track it too, take time. Um, we work with a lot of our athletes on setting a morning and nightly routine. Maybe part of that nightly routine is like, hey, you have a reflection question like, did I treat all my teammates properly today? And it can be something as simple as Y for yes or an N for a no. And you look back at that week and you're like, okay, like 3 out of 7, I got some work to do. So just simple, I say simple things like that are super tangible are going to be your best route forward. And then we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but just to clarify, like who's that accountability? Like, do you have somebody in the process with you? Maybe it's another teammate, maybe it's a family member, a close friend, whatever that looks like. But someone who can really just be like, "Hey, Coach Joe, how's that going? Like, did you live up to your standard this week?" I think that's something that's very overlooked in our culture, but it can be crucial in that process of growth.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I think two, accountability is always huge. So I'll second that. And then even the self-awareness piece, right? If you're not self-aware, how do you expect to change? How do you expect to get better or get to a place where you want to be if you're not aware of where you're at right now? And so I love the point that you made about just setting little things, putting little things aside and check marking it. Did I do this? Yes or no? because I'll go back to it's one of my favorite quotes and I'll go back to it, but it's the little things that you do today that will create lasting change over time. And I think it even goes back to our consistency point. It's what you do consistently that people will notice. And so it's the little things. It's showing up on time. It's setting goals and then chasing them. It's falling in love with the process. It's recognizing what you're not maybe doing so good of talking bad about my teammates behind their back, or cutting shortcuts in practice, or leaving early, showing up late. Like it's all those little things that add up to a point where you maybe recognize that I need to do something about it, but it's daunting to look at everything and try to change everything at once. And so that's I would advise you not to do that, because the reality is you might try it for a week, a couple days, and you're gonna be like, oh, this is too much, and you're gonna run away. I
Mhm.
would do what Coach Nolan said is pick one thing and do it for long enough that it creates a habit, and then it'll seem like second nature, and then that's maybe when you pick a new thing. That's maybe when you pick a second thing. But I think it all goes back to self-awareness again, of realizing where you need help, where you need a little bit more structure, where you need to be more just aware about your surroundings and yourself, right? And your weaknesses. Because we all like to point out our strengths, but we don't like to point out our weaknesses, what we're bad at. And so that goes back to the accountability piece of I need that Coach Nolan in my life to point me out and tell me where, hey, you're doing this really well, but you also, I think you need to work on this area, and I need to be humble enough to receive it. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, the last thing I would add too, as you were talking there, Joe, was uh like that friend, like they're not gonna like point out your flaws, they're just gonna remind you who you are. And I think when we do that, like self-evaluation, like I love that idea of being self-aware, but like give ourselves grace too. I think we can often be like our hardest critic. And so like I love the saying like criticize yourself to the point of improvement. Like a lot of times we criticize ourselves to the point of just beating ourselves up and just like putting ourselves in this hole of like, oh my gosh, like I'm just the worst. Like I never do this right, or I always screw that. And we throw those like big, like heavy words, like always, never. And it's just like that's not true, you know. So give yourself grace from the standpoint of like there are mistakes, there are things we want to grow in, but that's part of the practice, that's part of the walk. It's like, you know, it takes time, and so that awareness is huge, but also that grace piece I think is a huge attribute in a way, like a healthier way I guess to approach it as well.
yeah, yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So, yeah, guys, you guys brought some awesome questions to the table, just about integrity and how to live it out in the day to day. And I think we brought a lot of tangible things that you guys can do, to pick it up and run with it, and being consistent and being self-aware and finding those people on your teams, in your classrooms, in your circles that you can run with, to stand out, and to really just to be a leader, right? Continue to reshape and reframe the way that you do things, and the way that you think, and the way that you operate, and falling in love with the process and the journey, right? It's what it's all about. And so that was the group call Q&A for tonight. Coach Nolan, any last final words?
No, that's awesome. Like I said, we appreciate the questions, and I think, um, yeah, the more we can do these, the more we talk about it, the more self-aware we become. So keep taking those little steps, and it's going to pay off big time.
Amen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, be great.